From Ladette culture to sobriety, Janet Hadley tells us the amazing story of her relationship with alcohol. When her husband got diagnosed with a brain tumour, this definitely led Janet to drink more than she wanted to, and she began to realise it was a problem. Not only has she been sober for nearly 3 years, she has now set up her own business called Choose Sunrise. This is a fascinating story of sobriety, side hustles and passion. Welcome to the Anything is Possible podcast. Today I have with me a lady called Janet Hadley, who is the founder of a fascinating business called Choose Sunrise. I'm not going to give you a big intro. I'm going to introduce Janet just to give you the top line of what Choose Sunrise is and then why it came to be.
Thank you. And thank you for having me today. Choose Sunrise is a business that's founded on the belief that nobody should ever feel afraid to ask for help with alcohol use. And I'm on a personal mission to end the stigma that's associated with alcohol use disorder. And I'm bringing this message into the workplace, creating alcohol safe workplaces.
So, I mean, it is a really fascinating subject because I grew up in kind of the Ladette culture, and alcohol has very much been a part of my life in terms of friends, family, work. But I've noticed in my business a real shift through the generation that actually it's not that cool anymore, particularly for the younger generation. So I know that you're on a personal mission, which is what we're going to talk about, but it's actually quite a trend at the moment as well, isn't it?
It really is. I know it's not often that I'm on trend these days, so that's quite exciting. But yeah, the sort of Gen Z, as they've been called, are entering the workplace, and what employers are finding is that the kind of go-to rewards of a free bar are not actually as appealing as they might have been 10, 15, 20 years ago. So there's a lot of work to do here for employers to really get their heads around this change and to think about sober inclusivity in the workplace, because it's going to get more and more important.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I think for Make Events, my company, when we're organising events now, it's as much of a consideration as the alcohol, in the same way that over the years, you know, we've gone for all the different versions of milk and gluten-free and vegan. It's all about pro-choice. And I think, you know, we should be able to offer people chocolate as well as chocolate protein balls and non-alcoholic wine as much as wine. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of that. We're going to talk about you actually setting up the business and what you're doing and your mission, but let's just rewind back a little bit. So, Janet, talk us through your 20s, 30s. What was your relationship with alcohol like at that
Sounds
time?
like it was a lot like yours, actually. So I grew up in I was like a 90s ladette. So I think I finished university in 1999, 8 or 9, something like that. I mean, who can remember? I was so drunk the whole time. And I, like Zoe Ball and Sarah Cox were quite big, and they were like, you know, downing pints was cool and keeping up with the boys was important. I guess there was kind of like a point in time where like women's rights for the first time had really truly become solidified, and we were out there basically proving that we could do everything that boys could do, and that included drinking them under the table.
And how did you feel about alcohol at the time? Was it not like relevant to you, or were you having moments where you're like, oh, cringe?
Well, I think we all had the cringe moments, but because we did all have them, and I guess, you know, you end up in a bubble of people who are similar to you, don't you? I'm sure there were other people around who didn't drink excessively, but I didn't know any of them. So you attract people to you who were doing the same thing. And, you know, I was really shy as a child. And I think when I discovered alcohol, it just gave me this like massive confidence boost. And I just fell in love with alcohol. I really did. I enjoyed myself, and I enjoyed drinking it. And I didn't see anything dangerous about it at all.
And then you obviously go through uni, party culture and all of that, and then you met your husband. When was that?
Well, actually that was at university. So I know we've been together forever. I was only 20 and I'm 45 now. So how sad is that? But
so when you kind of got out of that party mode then together, what was your, as a couple, what was your relationship with alcohol like?
So we kind of we used to go out drinking right up until really when we had children. So I was 27 when I gave birth to triplets, which was a shock. I mean, I did know when I was pregnant, but you know, it was a really big shock. Because 27's not that young to have a child, but it's quite young to have 3.
In one go.
In one go. So, you know, that was obviously a completely life-changing experience. And I didn't drink when I was pregnant, and I didn't have any issues with that, actually. So, you know, I didn't really miss it. I felt sick a lot. So I don't think I really had like any kind of capital P problem with alcohol at that stage in my life. But what I can remember the first time we had a bottle of wine at home. So the girls must have been about maybe 7 or 8 months old, and they'd slept through. And we'd had a full night's sleep, and then we were watching The X Factor, of course, and we shared this bottle of wine, and it was like, oh, I remember alcohol, you know, and I think we just really sort of slipped into the habit of sharing bottles of wine and then having one each, and, you know, like that became like our Friday, Saturday nights, and you know, all that kind of mummy wine culture. That I really fell into that in quite a big way.
So you'd share a bottle of wine or have a bottle of wine with your husband maybe Friday, Saturday, and then would you maybe, if you did get any time to yourself with the girls, was that kind of like a few glasses of wine, a bottle of Prosecco?
Yeah. If I went out with my friends, we'd definitely have a few drinks, quite a few drinks actually. You know, when the girls were young, I drank heavily from time to time, I would say. And then it kind of sort of grew from there, really. So obviously, as children grow older, they become a little bit easier to look after in some ways. And I was getting a full night's sleep and everything. And I think at some point we probably started drinking on Thursdays as well as Fridays and Saturdays. Can't quite remember when that happened. But yeah, it would just be... It never felt like a problem because it's just what people do, or, you know, and you have a bad day at work, you might have a drink on a Tuesday, you know. It never felt like something that was ever going to be a problem for me.
Okay, and then come like 2018, you've been with your husband how long at that point then? About 20 years?
Yeah, 20 years,
wow. So three children, lovely marriage, 2018. Tell us what happens.
Yeah, so I was absolutely devastated by the diagnosis of my husband's brain tumour, which really did hit me out of nowhere. It was the biggest shock I think I've ever had, and that includes having triplets, you know.
And how did you find out what?
So what actually happened was he had a seizure in the night, and you know, that was quite a big trauma in some ways. The ambulance crew came. Then after that, he kind of was sent for loads of different tests, and everything came back as normal. And the very last test that they did was an MRI scan. And the doctor even said, he said, look, we're not going to find anything. We just need to do it, and then that'll be the end of this. So
like a one-off
it's just thing. Apparently something like 1 in 10 people has a seizure at some point for no apparent reason. So we just didn't worry about it. And then on the day of his results, I was due to be over in Manchester, and I said, do you want me to come with you? You know, I'll stay here if you want. And he was like, no, you go to work. And I had this meeting at work in the co-op, and I was presenting, and my phone rang, and I red buttoned my husband, and then it rang straight away again, and I said, I'm going to have to take this. And I went outside, and as soon as I put the phone to my ear, I knew, because I could just hear him crying. Like I could hear, like I could just tell. I knew that he had a brain tumour. It was and I can still picture the scene. There was all these blue chairs, and it all just sort of started swimming a bit, and everything went like brighter. It was a really weird experience.
And what was he told at that point of what kind of brain tumour it was and how it was going to affect him?
Yeah, so we didn't. You don't know until you basically have either an operation or a biopsy. So they have to get some of the tumour tissue and send it off for testing. So he was rushed in for an operation within a week, and the test results came back and they were low grade. So that was really good news.
So, and for those that don't know, what does low grade mean?
It means that you can probably live with this brain tumour for the rest of your life, and you're going to be quite unlucky for it to be the thing that kills you.
Yeah.
So, you monitor it and you go back to normal and you hope for the best.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were just, it felt like it was all over, really.
Hardly any time to process, though, really, from like, he's told he has an operation. Like, yeah.
So he was put onto monitoring, and then 12 weeks later, he had his first scan, and the tumour had grown back, and it was bigger than it had been in the first place.
Wow. In what time frame was that?
12 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah. So basically what they said is we've misdiagnosed it, and it can't be low grade to have grown at that speed. So he went back in for a second operation, and actually that was more successful. They got most of the tumour out, but it did leave him having to learn to walk again and having to learn to use his right hand again, and with the worst short-term memory of anyone walking this planet. But
And you said as well, and did this happen at this point, that his career, essentially he was a coder?
Yeah, he was like a computer programmer, and he just hasn't been able to return to that because, short-term memory, and he gets like what they call cognitive fatigue, where you just get very tired very quickly.
So this is 2018. So how do you both as a couple and as a family navigate what your future's going to look like? What was your strategy?
I mean, the saddest thing, I suppose, about it is that we've always talked about what we were going to do when we retire, even when I was 20. We've always had this retirement plan.
Really?
And we're going to sell up, and we're going to have just cash in the bank, and we're going to travel the world. And when we went traveling, we kept finding places that we might go when we retire, and all this, just plans. We talk about it all the time, and that just stopped. We don't talk about it anymore because we know he's not going to get old. Yeah. We know that he won't grow old. Yeah. And when that tumour comes back, it's high grade, and he's terminally ill. Yeah. So the way that we cope with it, I think, is that we live for today. Yeah. We don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the future. Yeah. And in some ways that can be really difficult, but in other ways it's actually incredibly liberating to be really present every single day and to make the most of it.
That's actually funny you should say that. There's a woman that I follow called Bozamo St. John. She's a very high up marketing director in the US. She's been marketing director for Uber, and her husband unfortunately did pass away. It was cancer, but she said that when he was given his prognosis, they used to wake up every day and say, what shall we do today? And they would do whatever popped into their mind, which I thought was lovely. So at that point, though, was really for you, wasn't it? The realisation that what you thought was going to be wasn't, and what wasn't.
It was like a grieving process, really. And I think for me, what happened really was that after that second operation, when he went to like a rehab centre to learn to walk again, and he was inpatient for more than 12 weeks. I think it was 14.
3 girls as well.
Yeah, I was juggling a lot, and I ended up every morning I'd wake up with a bit of a hangover, like a bit of a sore head, and I think I'm not going to drink tonight. Yeah. And I'd get through like all the hospital visits and taking the girls to school, and then taking them to see their dad after school, and we were also having our house extended at the time. It was just like absolute chaos. My life was just so difficult. Yeah. I'd get to the end of it and I'd just be like, I'm going to have a drink. Yeah. Like, I just need one. Yeah. And then it just got to the point where I was drinking like nearly a bottle of wine nearly every night. Yeah. And it was just, I just knew that this was wrong. Yeah. And that I needed to do something about it.
It's almost like you're trying to prescribe yourself self-care and self-love, but you haven't actually got time to do that in the right way. So the nearest gratification is that, you know. And how long did that go on for, really, until you kind of went, hang on a minute, this isn't...
Well, I kind of had a few attempts at ditching the booze. So, well, first of all, I didn't want to ditch booze. I wanted to moderate. Yeah. So I wanted to cut down, and I wanted to be like a normal drinker who didn't have to finish the bottle. Yeah. So I tried I mean, I just tried using willpower, and that, it'd work for a while, and then it'd just creep back up again. I tried cutting out wine and just drinking gin. And what would happen is I'd have like 2 gin and tonics. I don't really like gin, so I'd have 2 gin and tonics, and I wouldn't enjoy them. But because alcohol kind of switches off your decision making, I'd then just walk to the little Tesco on the corner and buy a bottle of wine.
Yes.
So I'd be like, oh, it sounds like a good idea now I've had 2 gins. So that didn't work. I tried saying we'll have no alcohol in the house and I'll only ever drink if I go out. And then I'd be like, does anyone fancy eating out tonight? Because I'd be like, oh, then I can have a drink. And it didn't matter what I did, it just kept coming back. So
And how did you feel about yourself at that point? Like, were you waking up the next day annoyed with yourself?
Yeah, I was actually. It's not like every single time I drank I got obliterated, but it was happening more than I wanted it to. And I wasn't happy with the wasted weekends, and the hangovers were getting worse. And I just felt like it was harming me physically and mentally. I could tell it was harming me, but I didn't know how to deal with life without it, actually.
And how long to this point when you had this kind of the final realisation from the diagnosis, how long was that time period, would you say?
It was 2 years. Yeah, it was 2 years of trying to moderate. And within that time period, I reached out for help to my workplace employee assistance programme, which is very, very good at Co-op. But I was told that I couldn't see the counsellor I wanted to see because he was classed as a rehab counsellor. I'd found a specialist alcohol counsellor. And rehab isn't covered. And I was like, I don't need rehab. I just want this person to help me. And they were like, no, you can see a general counsellor, which I did. And in the first session I had with her, she told me how much she drank, which was way more than I was drinking, and told me not to worry. And it was completely normal to drink to forget in my situation. So I skipped off out of that thinking,
I've had a pass.
I'm totally fine. I was like, I'm fine. And it kept me stuck. It kept me stuck for a long time, that. And I'm not suggesting that I'm holding Co-op to account for the fact that that happened to me, but I think it's an unintended consequence of, not actually really robustly kicking the tyres on what you're offering.
And during this time period, and then we will get on to kind of your journey to sobriety, had anyone mentioned to you, friends or family, like, Janet, do you think you should be having that glass of wine? Had anyone picked up on it?
Interesting you say that, because one of the first things that my husband said to me after his diagnosis, one of the first things that came out of his mouth was, promise me that after I die, you won't become an alcoholic.
Really?
Yeah.
So does that mean then you think that mind you were drinking together, weren't you? But do you think he probably knew as well it was too much? Yeah,
and there's a history of alcoholism on his side of the family, and he was at the time a really heavy drinker. I think he could see it in both of us, actually. And because what people don't realise is that the happy social drinker can become an alcohol dependent drinker very quickly after a big trauma.
Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah,
absolutely. Like, it's your crutch.
Yeah,
right. And there's that there is that percentage of it you enjoy until it goes over the edge. Yeah. So you got to this point where you knew it was harming you mentally and physically, and I guess as well, was it hard to understand, because you would have been depressed or certainly very, very sad with what was happening with your husband, but was it hard to distinguish those feelings when they were mixed with alcohol, would you say?
I think what I recognise now is that it was grief and bereavement for the life I thought we were going to have. And then they call it a living loss, where you're grieving for someone who is still here. So it's a very strange but recognised phenomenon. And I think alcohol was preventing me from processing things. Now that I'm coming up to 3 years sober, I realise that it's so what happens when you get sober is that you just have to face up to things. So you don't push them down with alcohol anymore, and you have to feel all the feelings. In fact, there's a saying, the worst thing about stopping drinking alcohol is that you have to feel all the feelings. But the best thing about stopping drinking alcohol is that you can feel all the feelings. So
that's quite funny, because when I came out of a like really long-term relationship, like 12 years, towards the end, I was like, I need to stop drinking because I can't make a decision when alcohol's involved. And I actually did 5 months. I wasn't... I was drinking in a different way, probably just like maybe binge drinking when I go out because I was sad or whatever. But it got to, and I was like, right, if I'm going to make a decision, then I need to be clear-headed. Yeah. And I didn't drink for 5 months. I hadn't, there was never an intention to stop, but it just allowed me to get through that period thinking clearly and properly. Yeah. And there's a sense of euphoria around that as well. Like, and also you're quite proud of yourself that you are feeling every feeling, because actually it's easier to deal with it than bottling it up. So, okay, so you tell us how, so you were like, was it one day that you went, that's it, or was it a gradual thing?
It was one day. Yeah, it was actually. It was one day when I woke up with a hangover, and the night before, one of my daughters had asked me to do something special with her, and I'd actually said no, because I just really wanted to drink. Yeah. And I woke up the next morning and I just thought, this is not right. Yeah. Like, I can't, like, I need to be a better mum, and I need to be a better person. And that for me was like a real tipping point. I was like, that can't happen again. So I phoned the alcohol counsellor who I wanted to see in the first place and just paid for it, which wasn't even that expensive. I don't know why I didn't do that earlier. Yeah. And it's the best decision I ever made. Yeah. So I worked with him he said to me, I said, oh, I want to cut down. I don't want to stop. And he said, really gently, he said, I normally work with a 12-week period of sobriety. And then at the end of that, you can go back to drinking. And I was like, okay, that sounds okay. So I'll do 12 weeks. But when you do 12 weeks and you do the work in therapy, there's no way that you're ever going to want to drink again. Yeah. And he knew that. But he said,
Didn't tell you that.
Yeah, if I tell you that, then, you won't believe me. So, it was a really good way to do it.
So there's a couple of interesting things there for me. So I think that choice, like you say, with your daughter wanting to do something, it's almost like when the pain of staying where you are outweighs the pleasure of staying where you are. That's when you make the choice. Yeah. And it has to be you.
Yeah, you're right, because humans are motivated by pain and pleasure. Yeah. And that was pain for me that morning. I was like, no. That's painful that I've made that decision. Yeah. And
before we get into the steps, the counsellor that you did have, did he apply the AA principles? Because I know you've talked about and we're going to talk more about this, you weren't necessarily an alcoholic, but you were in the grey area.
That's right, yeah. And it's not at all based on AA. Yeah. I mean, I know that AA helps millions of people, but it's not for everyone. And I think that psychology's moved on a lot since the AA 12 steps were put together, and that there are more positive ways to help people, actually. So for me, labelling yourself as an alcoholic is not a good way to help people recover. In fact, I always say to people, I stopped smoking in my 20s, and I'm not a smokeaholic. So I stopped drinking in my 40s. Why does that make me an alcoholic?
Yeah. And before we get onto the recovery, it just interestingly popped into my head, do you think there was any like deep dark root from your childhood why you drank, or was it literally a societal thing where that's how you grew up in your teens and early 20s?
I think a combination of society, always being surrounded by alcohol in childhood, and marketing. Because the big booze companies definitely marketed to women in the 90s, 110%. And I think I fell foul of that with hindsight. So I just think, and then a trauma.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So tell us about, so this is like what, mid-2020 when you start to look at recovery?
Yeah, it was June 2020 I stopped. June the 26th, 2020 was my last drink. Or was that day one of not drinking? I don't know. Anyway. I obviously working with this counsellor was really helpful for me. But the other things that I did were I connected with people in like the sober community. I started listening to podcasts and I started reading. And actually, in some ways, I do think that meeting like-minded people and having that support network around me was just as important, if not even more important than the counselling. And that stayed. So, you know, you do the counselling for 12 weeks, but that support network and people that I've met have stayed with me for years. And I now have like a community of my own. I've built, built my own one. And it's just, honestly, it's just, it's magical what happens when people come together with, you know, they could be from any walk of life, and you might not have anything in common apart from the fact that you've stopped drinking, but you build these really close friendships. It's interesting.
So how can I put this, how long till you didn't, I mean, maybe you still do, but you didn't think about it, it wasn't something you were trying to resist, there wasn't a compulsion, an urge? How long did that take?
Somewhere in that 12 weeks, I think.
Really?
The switch happened.
Wow.
Yeah, I think so. Because I don't think that you can maintain not drinking by sheer willpower for very long at all.
Yeah.
And it's like a switch in your head. You suddenly realise that the key to it is to create a life that you don't want to escape from.
Wow.
And that if you put enough good stuff in, like you were saying earlier about like the self-care and the self-soothing and better, more healthy habits that can help you to do that, you just realise you don't need to drink anymore. And then the thought of actually waking up with a hangover just feels so like that's like self-harm. That's horrible. Like, I can't imagine doing that to myself.
Wow.
I don't want ever to do that to myself ever again. So it's not like I have to resist having a drink,
because you've created a life that you want to step into every morning.
Exactly. I wake up in the morning and I'm like, come on, let's go.
Which really brings us nicely to the name of your business, Choose Sunrise. So just to give our readers some context, so Janet and I actually met because my company Make Events works with the wonderful Co-op, and Janet is head of supplier engagement there, and that's how we connected. But as well as having triplets and this really serious job, you decided to create a side hustle, I guess.
I did, yeah.
So tell us, what was the day that you thought, hang on, I'm going to do something with this?
Yeah, I know, it must be a little bit crazy. I've got so much energy now that I don't drink. I've got to put it somewhere. But so what happened was I was reflecting back on what had happened when I asked for help at the Co-op, and that I hadn't been able to get the help that I needed. And so I started engaging with the wellbeing team at the Co-op, who have been brilliant, by the way, and we are fixing that. So, you know, that's good news. And we started looking at other things as well. So we started looking at policies, and we started looking at things like the bullying and harassment policy and whether we could include sober shaming in that. And we started looking at workplace events and whether or not we had enough really respectful alcohol-free options in there. And then I started to do some sharing of my story, because I was thinking about all the things that had stopped me asking for help. And probably the biggest one was telling people. Yeah. Because I thought, as soon as I tell people, and this still happens now, if I tell people I don't drink, they have this moment of like this, you can see the thought almost going across their face of, oh, is she an alcoholic? Yeah. And it's that stigma of alcoholism that I wanted to tackle. Yeah. And I thought about other subjects that have been stigmatised, like mental health and even menopause more recently. And I thought about all the brilliant work that employers have done to reduce that stigma. And I just thought there's a gap here. So I started doing workplace events where I'd share my story, and people started coming to me and asking for help with their own alcohol use. So I felt a little bit out of my depth, actually. And I went and did some, in my own time and with my own money, I did some training, and I became a sober coach, and I've become an NLP practitioner.
Amazing.
So I did my sober coaching with Janie Lee Grace, who was brilliant, and NLP practitioner. You can do lots of different places. I did mine with Beyond NLP. And that's given me the skills that I needed to help the people who were coming to me. And then I started putting it together into like a digital program so that I could help more people. And it kind of became a sober coaching business. But the next step for me now is to get this message into the workplace, into more, and I want to take all of the brilliant work that I've done with Co-op and package it up and bring it to other employers. So it's already tried and tested in a big corporation. It's had a huge impact. We have 70 people in our head office workplace sober support group that I run. Like 70 people. I was expecting about 15. And, you know, someone told me yesterday that I'd saved their life, which, I mean, I did say, don't be so melodramatic. But, you know, isn't that interesting that that's someone's, perception of what a difference it's made to them in the workplace? And I just think that I don't think that there's very many HR directors who see that it's a need. But I think if they allowed the possibility of it, and for me to come in and just put the feelers out and set it up and see who comes along, I think they might be a bit shocked at how much people want to talk about this.
And from a, you know, if you want to look at it from a real business, financial standpoint, we all know that when we have a hangover, our work is not tip top. So from a productivity point of view, for HRs and L&D departments to recognise this. But I'm really interested because knowing the Co-op, it's a massive organisation, you know, you're heading up a department. So where did the skills come from to, you know, I'd love to know, because I think there's a lot of people that will be listening that have a side hustle or want to set up something in whatever arena that is. What were the steps? Was it like, I thought of a name, I got a website, like what were the steps?
Yeah, so I mean, it started off as a sober coaching business, so it didn't really have a name, it was just my name. So the first domain that I bought was janethadley.co.uk.
Always useful to keep though, Janet,
always,
you know?
yep still have a few little bits and bobs on there, but and then I really wanted to build this brand. I wanted to build this digital product that I'd made is called 101 Days to Sober, and I wanted to incorporate that in. And I'd got some quotes for people to kind of make me logos and things like that. And then I bumped into someone who I haven't seen for literally 20 years, who I used to work with her at Asda, and she used to design packaging for Asda.
Oh, wow.
And she now has her own studio. And she was like, look, it's too small a job for my studio, but I've got a really young like up and coming superstar designer who'll do it for you for hardly anything. And I was like, oh my god, that's amazing. So I've got all my beautiful branding. Like my brand guidelines are exactly the same layout that I used to have as a buyer at Asda.
Like, wow. Really
I'm like, oh I did get a very good bargain. And so all of that was really easy.
I love to talk facts and figures because I always think it's really interesting for people listening. So what kind of investment has it taken you to get it to where it is now?
I made a couple of mistakes. So I've probably spent about £4,000. And I could have done it for two because I've definitely, the tech is a big learning for me. So the software that I've bought now is like under $1,000 a year.
You were telling me about that. Do you want to give it a little plug? Because you've like, I mean, I said to you, I've noticed from being on the receiving end of all your like comms that it looks super professional.
It's just so easy and everything can be automated. So it's called Gold Star Pro. And I can send you a link to put into the show notes. Because I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about my software mistakes and what I've learned and the money I've wasted. But this software has been amazing, and I've got all of my digital content in there, and then I've also got all of my CRM and my email lists and my websites in there, and my social media scheduling is in there, and my survey that I've just created called How Alcohol Safe Is Your Workplace, that's all in there. So it's just brilliant.
And for our listeners, like, you were not like, this is not what you do day to day, is it? So you've you know, at 40 at the time, 43, 44, you've like taught yourself all these new skills. I guess, I mean, having that commercial corporate background and being a buyer, you know, I've got a lot of the thinking.
I've got like I suppose it is quite an entrepreneurial role within a big corporation, but my goodness, it's so different when you're on your own. I've got no one to delegate to, and it's like everything is down to me, and you know, it feels very different, but I'm just enjoying it so much, and it's such rewarding work. And you know, I've made that initial investment back. So this year we
going to
can
ask you
actually make some money.
That's unbelievable. So talk to us about that. So how's it become revenue generating for you?
Yeah, so the main way that I've generated revenue has been through one-to-one coaching so far. So I sell packages called, like I said, 101 Days to Sober, and you can buy a package that has either 6 or 12 one-to-one coaching sessions with me alongside all of the digital content, and that's the main product that I've been successful in selling.
And what kind of investment is that? Because there might be somebody listening and think, that this is making them think, I recognise a bit of me in this.
Yeah, so for 6 sessions and the programme, it's £750, and then for the 12, it's like 1,224, I think.
Yeah.
It's a funny number, that one.
Brilliant.
But and that's, I love doing it as well.
Yeah.
I really love doing it. And then I've got a sober socials group as well for people who are already sober, so they don't need all that kind of coaching. And that's really quite good value. It's £12 a month, and you get access to like all of the talks that I've done on different topics, things like your first sober Christmas, or like going on holiday, like in an all-inclusive holiday sober, stopping drinking when your partner doesn't. There's loads of stuff in there that you can access, and then we have a get together on Zoom every month, and we're actually meeting up in real life next week, so that's exciting.
Oh wow. I think the really interesting thing is here that this is about I know that you love your day-to-day job, but you've kind of found this passion that isn't really about money. It's great that it's making money now, but that wasn't the reason that you do it. And you read any kind of self-help book, and it's all about like when you suddenly do the thing that lights you up, the money comes later. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would actually, because I've done a lot of free of charge work to get to a point where I feel confident enough to charge, and I've like I say, I've tried and tested all this stuff at the co-op that I now feel confident enough to go and do in another organisation. So I must have put like to get back to zero, when you think I could have just done like literally nothing and been at the same point financially, that is insane to have done that much work to get to zero. It's all been purely driven out of passion and wanting to help people, wanting to make a difference in the world, and wanting to end this horrible stigma that people who get into trouble with alcohol do not deserve.
So just go back to kind of the emotional side of it. Since being sober, have you actually had to deal with the grief and the feelings around what may or may not be for you and your husband? Has that been a journey for you as well?
Yeah, definitely. It feels like when you first get sober, I think everything is raw, like everything. And it's like you have to kind of deal with things as an adult for the first time, which is horrible and scary. It's definitely been, it's not all been plain sailing, without a doubt. I've had moments of just feeling completely overwhelmed with grief. I've had, I stepped down from a promotion at work because I just felt that I was giving too much of my headspace to it almost. So I stepped down into, I'm still in a really senior role, but I just stepped down into something that I felt I could do a really, really good job of, and be really present at home with my husband and my children and run a business. So it was just a step too far being promoted.
I think grief's an interesting topic, and something that we are addressing at the Anything Is Possible conference, that grief comes in many forms, and it can come in, the natural bereavement that we would expect with parents, or we lose a friend, or Sian Lord that's in series 1 loses a leg. That's a grieving process for a life that you're not going to have, and it's almost like a complex grief, isn't it? I would say.
It is. That's exactly right. It is a complex grief, and it's not a one-dimensional thing. It's like it's like a cloud almost. It moves and it shifts and it changes shape, and it's different on different days. Some days the cloud is all white and fluffy and it's okay, and some days it's really black and grey and quite ominous. Can
you say that this phrase that I've heard used, that is, living this whole life without a whole heart, would that sum things up to you? Like, what is there a missing piece in this? I know he's here, is with you, and you're living your life together, but like how do you, I'm always really fascinated with how do you live in, you know, and have the happiest and be the happiest you can when you've got this, you know, essentially this heavy weight, this grief.
Yeah, I don't feel like I identify with that particular phrase. For me, something has changed permanently though, that will never ever be able to go back. It's more like it feels more like a rawness, like an edge to life that wasn't there before. Like life was very comfortable, and I had a lot of security, like nothing really bad had ever happened. So I just kind of assumed that nothing ever would. And then when something like that happens, you just feel a bit less trusting of the world, the universe somehow, and you just feel, I don't know, I feel a bit more wary somehow.
Bit bruised and battered, I guess.
I guess. Yeah.
Well, it is really, really exciting. So you've got a podcast now.
I have,
which
yes.
is called...
It's called Professional Drinkers from Choose Sunrise.
Yeah. And tell us about that, because people, where can they find it? Who are your guests?
So you can find it anywhere that you get your podcast. So it's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Anchor FM, so you can find it easily. And the whole podcast is about alcohol culture in the workplace. So I interview people who've got opinions on this. So it could be anyone from an HR professional through to someone who's had a really good or a really bad experience in the workplace. I've interviewed people who organise sober-friendly events. And basically it's really all about the case for change in the workplace. And it's really nice when I hear from progressive employers who are doing really good work in this space. So it's not all about the disaster stories. It's some of it's about, you know, brilliant best practice stories as well. And I'm loving doing the podcast. I've met some really interesting people.
Such good fun, isn't it? I love it.
I love it.
So on to a few more fun things. Let's find out, for people that are sober curious or sober, in your opinion, what is the nicest alternative to a champagne in this sober?
Oh, that's easy. Easy. So it is Naughty from Thompson and Scott. It is the only one that I would consider having on my Christmas table now.
Okay. And what about, how are wines doing? Because wine seems to be the hardest thing to
getting better. Getting better,
what
definitely. So for a red, there's one called, I don't know how you pronounce it. It's called Win-E, like the word wine with a dash in it. And it's the Tempranillo that is aged in oak barrels for 12 months. And it tastes of oaky, red winey loveliness. And it's brilliant. It's really good.
Put that in the show notes, actually.
Yeah. No one seems to know about that one.
No, I might try that.
Yeah. I didn't really drink white wine too much, so I'm not super clear on that, but people drink the McEwan's from the supermarket and seem to enjoy the you know, the Sauvignons from that. So they are getting better, but I do think that in some ways when you switch to alcohol free, it helps to switch to something you didn't drink the alcohol version of, if you see what I mean. So it doesn't taste as, you're not comparing it so much.
I believe there's some nice, like a nice way to make a fake Aperol spritz as well.
There's a company called Anon, A-N-O-N, and they do, I don't know what they call it, but it's, you know, you can tell from looking at it what it is. That's very, very good. And they did an amazing product at Christmas. They did this Christmas pudding liqueur, but alcohol free. And I was drinking that with fresh cream. So it's kind of like naughty. But really, really good,
So I guess, like, one of the messages that we love to instill in people at Anything is Possible is that anything is possible at any age. You started a business at, you know, mid-40s. Has it inspired you, like, for the decades to come and what you could do as well?
Yeah, definitely, 100%. I mean, Co-op have been so supportive, allowing me to, you know, get this up and running, while still doing my day job. You know, I've put a lot of hours in, out of hours, I can tell you, I really have. Eventually, I would love to get to a point where I've got enough other really progressive employers who want to invest in this that I can actually leave the Co-op and just work full-time in creating alcohol-safe workplaces, and putting on alcohol-free events with the company that I'm partnering with, and just having the time of my life in the alcohol-free community. Yeah. That's what I want to do.
So for people listening that might be working for a company that might find that interesting, where can they find you?
Yeah, so they can easily find me on LinkedIn, Janet Hadley, and you can also find my website, choosesunrise.co.uk. And if you just head to the HR section, you can book an appointment online, you can email me, you can sign up for free resources, all sorts of things. And soon you'll be able to do the survey, which I've just been building today, called How Alcohol Safe is Your Workplace, which is a good starting point for anyone who's in HR.
Well, Janet, I'm so glad to have met you, and with what we're trying to do with Anything Is Possible, we've talked about, things that we can do together in the workplace. I'm really excited to have met you and come on this journey with you. Before we finish today, and the podcast is called Anything Is Possible, what does Anything Is Possible mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question. Anything is possible to me means dream big. It means take the roof off and try to set aside all of the things that you think to yourself that actually are limiting beliefs, like I can't, I always, I must, I never. Catch yourself thinking those things. And really, like I always say, take that thought to court. So if you say, I can't leave my job because I will never earn enough money if I leave my job. Like, according to whom? What is the evidence for that? So nobody has ever been able to leave their job in their mid-40s and make enough money out of a business. Is that really true? Of course it's not. Some people can. So, take the thought to court, test it. Is probably not true.
I love that. I saw a quote the other day, and it was something along those lines, and it was like, the chances of it actually ruining your life is very unlikely.
Yeah, exactly.
You find a way, don't you? And if that way is not right, you find another way. So I'm really happy to have met you. Much love to your family as well.
You.
And I hope that your husband is doing well at the moment, and here's to a sober future and the growing passion of your business as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much.